One of my mutuals asked me if I would tell my unschooling story because I haven't really gotten into that yet. We've been unschooling for 4 years. My son got into a wonderful school. It was literally winning the lottery for him to get in. Not only is it the best school in the county, it's the school that my dad and my sisters went to, and it is in my parents' neighborhood, less than a mile from their house. So my little dude went there for kindergarten and first grade. It's a school that has really high test scores, talent shows, and a book parade, and all sorts of wonderful traditions. Even the best school might not be the best school for your kid. It was not awesome for us. There was a culture of ableism and wealthy white supremacy there. And on top of that, my kid was having nosebleeds and upset stomach, and we were having a really hard time getting out the door in the morning, and every day after school there was a meltdown in the car. And I knew something was wrong, but other parents told me their kids were doing the same thing, and they offered me their kid's therapist number. And I was like, why are these kids in therapy? They are 5 and 6. What is going on? I knew that my child was being required to sit for many long hours a day, and I knew that they really valued memorization, being quiet, reading and writing, and doing what you're told, and those were not his strengths. He was very loving, and he loved touching and talking to his friends, and he was told that you were not allowed to do that there. He liked to go barefoot, and he was told he had to keep his shoes on. His masculinity was policed. They said you can't wear those hats, you can't wear bracelets, you can't wear these different accessories, while at the same time little girls were wearing headbands and barrettes and jingle bracelets, and they had doodles all over their backpack, necklaces. And so it was very clearly a rule that was being applied to boys and not to girls. They did stuff like punish him for talking by putting him on silent lunch. He has to sit alone at a table by himself and watch all of his peers talking. The only time of day that you're supposed to be allowed to talk. He would be punished for moving around in class and not being able to sit still by having his PE taken away. And you can't tell me that that's the right thing to do with a kid who really needs to move. From a very early age, he did not like to receive unsolicited advice or instruction. He liked to be left in flow states, working on something of his own choosing for as long as he wanted to work for. He did not like to have somebody come and take it away and tell him it was time to move on to something else. He was very good at teaching himself things, very good at using tools and screwdrivers and hammers and stuff from very, very young. Super agile. We call him our little mountain goat. He's like a professional climber. He had this gorgeous long attention span, and he would get focused on something, and then he could just flow with that one thing for hours and hours, even as a baby. And babies are supposed to have these like super short attention spans, but he didn't. And all of these things that he was good at, school is just not set up to value any of that. It's all about sitting down and being still and writing and memorizing and stuff that he was able to do, and he made good grades. But every day after school, he cried. Every single day after school, he would have a big meltdown in the car just as soon as the car door closed. I just really felt like there was nothing wrong with my kid. There was nothing wrong with me, but this space, this culture, everything about it was making us really physically uncomfortable. And towards the end, my son was having nosebleeds and stomach aches. We had eliminated every kind of food allergy and environmental allergy. It was anxiety. It was extreme anxiety from being a high masking neurodivergent kid who was forced to comply with all sorts of restrictions that do not fit what his body and his brain and his mind needed. But I did not know that at the time. The year that he was in first grade, it was around the end of Christmas break when my son had been home for a couple weeks, and we were just doing free play. It was just a stay home and heal time. Everything, all of the anxiety, the resistance, things I thought of as like behavior problems at that time, had just like cleared up. And he wasn't arguing with me constantly and pushing back on me constantly. I also wasn't constantly issuing demands and hustling him through transitions. The autonomy of Christmas break really made me realize that my kid was not the problem. So I knew school was flawed. I had tried a bunch of teaching at different private schools, teaching at Montessori, and school didn't work for me as a teacher. Private school was definitely not an option, and I don't even believe in private school because I had worked in so many. I knew a lot of them are a scam. Basically, we had to figure out a way to homeschool. But the thing is that my kid wasn't open to me being his teacher. He was very sensitive to any kind of pedantic energy coming from me, not open to unsolicited advice or instruction. He did not really want any kind of help from me or interruption from me when he was in a flow state. When I was a teacher, people thought of me as this really fun, kind of Mary Poppins, awesome teacher. The fact that my kid wasn't open to that energy from me was hard on my ego. Around that time, I found AKYLA S. Richards' podcast, Fair of the Free Child. She's an unschooling mom, and in the early episodes, she was even living in Atlanta, the city where I live. And I heard women on that podcast telling my story, and it wasn't just the stuff about the school and school choice and so on, but it was other things about like attachment parenting and home birth and all the other stuff that I had believed in and been through. I realized that they had chosen unschooling as a natural extension of that path. I recognized my children in the stories they told about their children. And unschooling quickly became a special interest, and I spent the next 6 months researching it and listening to podcasts and reading books. We knew that school wasn't working for us, that this great school that our family had a legacy with was not working for our kid. But if we drew him out of school, then we couldn't put him back in because it's not our neighborhood school. We got in through the lottery. So it was an extremely serious decision to pull him out, and it took me a while to do it. It took me about 8 months after I realized over that Christmas break that it was time to let him be free, that he was way happier when he was self-directed. But I wasn't ready to let go of that school choice spot, and I used that time to research as much as I could. At the end of that school year, at the end of first grade, I asked my son, would he like to be his own teacher? And he was like, absolutely. And my only regret is that we stayed in that long. I wish that I had pulled him out at the end of Christmas break that year. It would have saved us a lot of nosebleeds. And so we went for it. I took him out of school. We started a process of deschooling, which was supposed to be 1 month of deschooling for every year that he had been in school. And I decided to do 6 months because he was 6 years old. I say that he started school at 2.5, but he actually was almost born into school because I'm a teacher. My stepmom is a teacher and a facilitator. My dad is an art teacher. Mom has a master's degree in art education, and my sister has an early childhood education degree. Our family culture was very schoolish from the beginning. I was the type of parent who turned everything into a learning opportunity. I did not let moments go by without like, oh look, there's a caterpillar. Let's look it up. Let's see what it is. It was a bit much. It really was. I also had this sensitivity to notice that my son didn't want that from me. He was very sensitive to any type of instruction, advice, or interruption. So I learned very quickly when he was very young, as a baby, watching him play, that he needed to learn through doing it his way. He was self-teaching from day one. So there we were, home. We were unschoolers now, and I was trying to figure out like the rules of unschooling. What's a typical unschooling day like? What do you guys do all day? How do you break up the time? Like, I was looking to replace school. Instead of curriculum, like I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing curriculum, I joined museums and the zoo and the botanical gardens, and I hauled my kids around to everything, every kind of activity and encounter, and I tried to get us into all these different groups. I had a smidge of an idea about deschooling. I thought that I was being self-directed because I let the kids wear whatever they wanted and I let them eat whatever they wanted. I also experimented with bedtime, but we learned that we really needed that. And that was probably my first lesson in the way that unschooling is customized. There isn't one way of unschooling. Some of the radical unschoolers online may tell you that you can't have a bedtime or you can't have limits on certain things or screen time or whatever. But a lot of us are like, no, that's not true. Like, maybe we don't limit time on devices, but you're not just consuming anything out there on the web on that device. We care about the content that you're consuming. Yeah, you can eat whatever is in the pantry, but we're not letting you eat food that you are allergic to. So it's up to me with my advanced prefrontal cortex to not bring any food into the house that you're allergic to or that I don't want you eating. It's up to me, not the kid. If I can't resist it in the grocery store, how's he supposed to resist it in his own pantry? Before the pandemic, I was a facilitator in a homeschool cooperative where different moms proposed different events and meetups and get-togethers throughout the year, and they were mostly at parks and nature trails and sometimes at different gardens or museums, and we would meet up and do different activities with our kids, sometimes book club or poetry tea time. I began to transform my home. I got a big vehicle so that I could drive other families around with us and we could ride together to places. And I even began to create a tiny farm on a vacant lot in my neighborhood with another homeschooling family to be our homeschooling natural living hub. But the pandemic shut that down before we could even break ground. Right around that time, I began to realize that the ADHD that I had been diagnosed with in 1995 actually meant something, and that what I was experiencing as my son's argumentativeness and control freakiness was actually a form of anxiety. I have anxiety, but I get like sad and small and sweet when I'm feeling anxious, and my son starts doing repetitive banging, pacing, arguing, pushing back, real sassy mouth stuff that does not read as, oh, I'm scared and I can't predict what's going to happen. It reads as, I'm being a bit of a jerk. I started researching those traits. I started researching another family member's traits, and I found PDA. PDA explained so much about our experience and me, who I was. Because it was the pandemic, all of these people, these actually autistic adults, were at home recording videos and talking about their lived experiences, and all these pieces fell together, and I began to understand, oh, I'm autistic, and my family has multiple neurodivergences through every generation. And so much began to make sense about my childhood, about their childhood. And so now I'm in a space with my unschooling where I'm going to be proceeding back into the world someday, I hope, with a neurodiversity informed perspective. And I will not be as focused on unschooling versus homeschooling, curriculum versus no curriculum. I will be autonomy focused. And if a child is choosing to work with curriculum, that is and always has been fine with me. My children choose not to work with curriculum. If a kid is doing some kind of online academy, or they're doing a la carte classes through the computer, any number of things still count as self-directed learning to me. I would say that self-directed learning is now a more accurate label than unschooling, but a lot of people use unschooling, and so I still use it so that I can find my peers. That the process of deschooling would lead me through so many different rabbit holes, and it would lead me to autonomy, and it would lead me to understanding the way that living a flow and freedom-based life works for me. It became multi-generational around the time that the pandemic sent us into isolation. What we are doing as a family has become multi-generational self-directed learning. It's no longer an educational style that is about the kids. It is about our whole family, and it is about a life based on autonomy and special interests.